Hello and welcome to this video on the surprisingly humble origin and history of aspirin. Aspirin is of course the pain relief and blood thinner commonly consumed in the form of a tablet or dissolved in water. It is prescribed in low doses for heart disease and in slightly higher doses for pain relief. While aspirin is no longer the most popular analgesic, it is still regularly popular and retains niche applications that have yet to be usurped. Aspirin is otherwise known as acetylsalicylic acid. It is a relatively simple molecule with a carbon ring, carboxylic acid, and ester functional groups. As a medication, aspirin has up to 100 bioavailability. This means when you eat or drink the tablet, you can use all the contents and it is not disposed of in your feces. Low doses of aspirin can be metabolized and excreted from the body in as little as 3 hours, and larger doses can be excreted in up to 30 hours. Like its ability to control pain, aspirin's ability to control fever is down to a particular way it affects the immune system, specifically the prostaglandin system within it, and how it then inhibits another signal known as COX. It is for these reasons that up to 44,000 tons of aspirin are used annually. As a drug, aspirin has only been a recent thing. It was in 1897 that Bayer studied and developed what they considered a less aggravating acetylsalicate medication. By the turn of the 20th century, this new product was what we know as aspirin. That was the brand, much like how Google is a search engine, Kleenex are tissues, laundromats are a place to wash clothing. And like these, it underwent genericide, meaning that the term aspirin, although originally owned and controlled by Bayer, is now simply a generic term for all drugs that contain the particular active ingredient. While Bayer may have made aspirin as a product, it wasn't necessarily a novel discovery. This is why they were after a less side effect prone version of acetylsalicylic acid. As far back as 2000 BC, we have records of willow bark being used as an analgesic. These can be found in ancient Greek texts. By the time of the Enlightenment and Renaissance, willow bark was well used as a folk remedy analgesia, but the active ingredient was not clear, nor was its veracity. This is where, in 1763, Edward Stone proved that aspirin can treat fever. That's part of that prostaglandin and inhibition of COX. Although that part's novel, it wasn't until the mid-1800s or thereabouts that they were able to elucidate the active ingredients. At first, salicin was found. Salicin is produced within the willow plant, and it's a precursor to salicylaldehyde. This then led to the discovery of salicylic acid itself. This is the organic compound that makes up aspirin. It's specifically a precursor and a metabolite of aspirin itself. Within the willow plant, it's a hormone. Going forward to 1852, you have the discovery of acetylsalicylic acid. And this was the first readily recognizable and practically chemical mirror of modern aspirin. That is a little over 3,850 years to go from using willow bark to having a readily available medication with a controlled dose. If you're interested in the history, you may also be interested in the natural way it's extracted before they started to make it synthetically. The first step was always to have access to the willow tree, and it had to be a particular species. There are many that contain salicin, the precursor, but the problem is some of them simply don't have enough to have any notable effect. By the time they make it through the GI tract and into the bloodstream, they're simply so dilute that there's no point. In general terms, you can look at either the white willow, the black willow, or the pussy willow. All three contain the aspirin precursors in significant quantities. In order to be able to use it historically, they would remove both the inner and outer bark from the tree, making sure that when they removed it, they did not cut all the way around the tree, but rather took out bark from a small section, broken branches, or similar. If they cut around the entire tree in a ring, it would ring bark the tree and lead to its death. This bark was then shredded so that only the inner pink section was visible. This was then steeped in water, a very small amount. Modern recipes use a volume of 1 to 2 teaspoons in roughly 250 milliliters of water. This is steeped for 10 to 15 minutes. After this, they remove the bark from the water and allow it to sit for a further 30 minutes. This reaches a functional dose, let's say. Salicin within willow bark is related to aspirin, the acetylsalicylic aspirin, but it's not the same product, and this is one reason why Bayer developed it the way they did. There are also issues around just how active it is. When you look at salicin from willow, it's part of a much larger and much more mixed concoction. The willow has phenols and flavonoids along with a bunch of other molecules. Salicin is just one of these, and it's one reason why the willow extraction will act more slowly, but last for about the same amount of time. This still leads to another problem. You don't know the exact concentration of salicin from willow bark. Generally, you're looking at a roughly half to 1% salicylic acid concentration to cause irritation. And since you can have very unexpected volumes or concentrations within willow bark, you can have these irritations occur more readily. Most standard willow bark concoctions will have a concentration greater than 1% at dry weight, but this is then dissolved in a liquid which brings it down well below that. The wild species don't have anywhere near that concentration in many cases, and realistically only the three we've mentioned can reliably expect to produce more than 1% in a dry weight, let alone wet weight when it's diluted down in everything else. This is the big difference between the, let's say, ancient salicin option of willow bark and modern aspirin. Aspirin provides a reliable, predictable, and consistent dose. You don't need to guess, and you don't need to wait to see side effects. The ancient option is simply more natural, and admittedly, if you have access to the necessary equipment, no doubt you could find out what concentration is contained within your given sample, but this will also vary between batches, it will vary between species, and possibly between times of year when you are making it. This is why Bayer made the product that they did. You got a consistent product that didn't cause the same degree of irritation and stomach problems that consuming willow bark did. Hopefully this information on not only the origin of aspirin, but what it is, has proven helpful. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.